know, Howard and Jeff Harble were partners in patent attorneys Collison for many years, and I greatly appreciated their professional advice and friendship over an extended period. In addition to the write-up in the bulletin, Howard was an active member of the Australian Institute of Patent Attorneys for many years and also served as president of that institute. Howard was also an active participant in the Invaders Association and attended their meetings as an advisor on intellectual property matters. I now ask Howard to come forward and talk to us about some of his fascinating experiences in patent and trademark registration and protection. Thank you, Howard.
Started in March 1956 as a raw 18-year-old, having spent a couple of years rather unsuccessfully at Adelaide University. I was looking for something to usefully do, and my father had a friend called John Schmidt. John was a patent attorney, and he met this guy called Ken Metcalfe, who together has plotted up this idea in relation to paint, dilute paint, would you believe. Ken was a radiologist and worked for something then called Weapons Research Establishment, WRE. And he had noticed in the side of his X-ray machine dust patterns that were being caused by some mechanism, and he just queried it. They needed to explore whether this could be a patentable invention. And I happened to be a loose body, so John called me and said, would you be interested in a little bit of part-time work? That ended this last year, after 56 years. The start was ignominious, to say the least. Searching, which is a matter of finding out whether other people had come up with the same idea, amounted to looking at old documents and reading them to see whether they, in fact, anticipated the idea. And the most logical documents in this field were the patent documents. The only patent documents in 1956 that we could get were in the back of the South Australian Library and Research Department. This was a dark, dingy room. It had a living ghost in the corner that grunted occasionally. And it was lit by a couple of candles. In fact, they were lights, but they looked like candles. And I spent my first two weeks in the patent attorney profession searching through dusty volumes of just about incomprehensible dirge. I actually, would you believe, found something back in 1934. A German inventor had discovered something similar. But of course, what I didn't realise at the time was that this was a template for what I was going to experience in the future. And what were they? You generally didn't know what you were looking for. You were always in the dark. The people teaching you or major energy problems of world significance. And surprisingly, it supports my rationale or discovery, I suppose, which is that inventors are normally not experienced in the field that they're inventing in. That sounds strange. I remember very well, I was helping a Ballarat firm negotiate a worldwide license with a company called Merck, Dome and Sharptoma, that were huge pharmaceutical operation, who were looking to license some technology from this little Ballarat firm. And I asked Paddy, who was representing them, I said, Paddy, look, with all respect, why are you, considering you're representing one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, why are you talking to this very small Ballarat firm? And he looked at me and he said, Howard, we at Merck, Sharp and Dome employed the most experienced, well-qualified scientists in the world. We have at least 2,000 in this field. We don't have an inventor amongst them. Ken Metcalfe was a radiographer. A radiologist. What was it he in fact invented? Continuous tone photocopier. This was not the only technique for photocopying, but an alternate system. And it led to something like 200 patents based upon this rationale that later on the Commonwealth owned and licensed. One thing that I noticed, however, was that even with unlimited funds, that's if the Commonwealth would say they have unlimited funds, they were still unsuccessful in effectively commercialising that most basic invention, which makes you now wonder. Now, let me give you some examples of people who I have huge admiration for and who have, to a larger extent, been successful. And the first person I'd like to raise is Brian Measday. Now, has anybody seen those green well, they call them, little water well things around trees in all the parks? Now, that was invented by a guy called Brian Measday, who's the most conservative accountant you've got to believe. We have a great deal of joking, and I keep reminding him that he's a conservative accountant, now retired. He knows how to count money. But would you believe that Brian has been very successful in having that money, and he spends now his retirement going around Bunnings and other stores promoting this green work. But it's been, and he sells it around the world, it's been successfully protected and selling well. An accountant, certainly not experienced. He did have a background in gardening. Another person of interest is Bruce Canby. Now, if people know Bruce at all, yes. Bruce was doing his PhD at Adelaide University, and one of his supervisors was a guy called Don McCoy. And Don had been playing around with metal detection for coin detection, so that they could determine whether a coin was 5 cents or 10 cents or 50 cents. But we found, in fact, in searching, that we found in searching that there was a patent that blocked us entirely in that field. So they scrapped around and thought, well, maybe just ordinary metal detection accepted patent application. They raised $1 million and, would you believe it, failed. It was taken over by some investors and the rest is history. Some 25 patents later, MindLab is now selling metal detection, metal discrimination equipment around the world. They have a superior technology. But Bruce, when he came up with that, had absolutely no background in the field. It was almost an accident, although he tends to be an extraordinary brain, I have to say. He also, incidentally, invented the world's most perfect audio amplifier, which they were selling around the world. I think the accuracy was 1 part per billion. I couldn't hear the difference. Another example of a person totally out of their field, although I was in relation to it, was a guy called Nick Leonardis. Now, Nick could neither write particularly well nor read. He was a concrete worker and he came up with the idea of the separation of what they call waffle pots. If Peter's here, Peter will know very well the so-called waffle pot separation in foundations, buildings. Nick came up, first of all, with just a tin replica, afterwards converted into plastic, and has gone on from there to create quite a successful major business. That was until it was visited by someone from the motorcycle squad who asked him to hand over all his rights to the particular motorcycle group. And he rang me up in great dismay and I said, why don't you actually talk to the South Australian Police? Fortunately, they took action and he continued his business. But it's not an easy world. The patent system is not the easiest one to deal with. We were talking before about instances where you really shouldn't walk into the system at all. In fact, in practice, I'm not sure about Jeff, but I certainly spent probably 20–30% of my time desperately talking to people to dissuade them from going into the patent system. Not the right thing to do, it's too costly, you risk too much, you disclose all your secrets if there are some. So the balance of whether you go into a patent system or not is a difficult one. However, there are dreamers and schemers. Now the dreamers, this touches perpetual motion of course, the dreamers hope for myriads of dollars falling on their lap because they've discovered the secret. And to suggest to them that they shouldn't patent their idea is absolute desolation. And I remember on one occasion we were instructed by this most hopeful gentleman on an idea that was clearly a perpetual motion operation. And you'd say, look, would you think that you should get a working model that really comes and works and so on? I don't know, I'm going to make my fortune. It takes a little while to prepare and write a patent, particularly when it's a little bit difficult to write because it hasn't got a basis of validity. About 4 days later, we got a solicitor's letter saying that we had been unduly delaying this thing and that his client was going to in fact sue us for loss of income for the period that it took to write it. Another example, however, was the Schema. And it's unfortunate when you see people who, in fact, rely on gullibility. There was one, I'm trying to remember very much the name, a Queensland crowd. They had raised millions and millions of dollars. They got a patent on this, but of course the patent process will accept patents on a complicated machine, provided it has an end result that's mechanical result. It doesn't test the question of energy efficiency, particularly if it's over unity or it's more efficient than it can be. So these people eventually, they had an example in which a battery drove a particular machine, and the output of the machine showed some lights. The only thing is that if a machine actually takes the current from the battery in alternating style, in other words, it stops and starts a little bit, the meter that you use to read it has to be organised so that it will read that properly. These people used a standard smooth current meter, and it looked as though it was fairly good. And unless you knew that, it could be full. They raised huge dollars. All you can do in those situations is show the people what happens, why it happens, and then hope to heck that they understand and take your expertise properly. Kidderminster is another example. Kevin is a detective, or was a detective, based in Perth, and he came up with the idea of a cutting machine. Now, you've all had a chainsaw in which the chain is the cutting surface, and it's got little blades on it. Kevin had come up with something that cut in a different way, in which the blades themselves rotated a little bit each way, but it was safe. And in fact, you can put your hand against the face of these blades as they bite, and what do we get? Nothing. He tried to sell this around the world, which in fact he's doing now, but one of the difficulties was in America, his distributors and other companies said, we can't sell this. If we sell it and promote it as a safe alternative to the chainsaw, our argument that there's no reasonable alternative to the chainsaw, and therefore all the pending suits against us that claim it will get validity. So he could no longer, he still sells it, and in fact it's very, very effective. But Kevin has been continuing as an effective Australian operator. Those are just a few examples. I was adding up how many, and there are literally 50 or 60 individuals, all with similar stories. The future for the inventor is, for us, and supporting the inventor is important. Our system for protection of the inventor is not a good one. Our system of supporting them with money, which is generally toxic, doesn't help very much. And almost all the cases that I'm involved in, it's not got any government support involved in it. I think that we have to look at this system much more carefully and work out how we can in fact do this without poisoning the very entrepreneurial nature that creates the invention. I am not going to leave the profession as such. I'm retired from general practice, but I'm having a great time now helping in a less formal capacity many great inventors. It's been great being able
Howard will be willing and happy to answer questions from any of the 50 or 70 or 100 inventors present here today if they wouldn't mind putting up their hands.
How do you get on if an Australian makes an invention? Do you have to register it in every country around the world? And what sort of cost is that?
That's a fascinating question. I didn't touch the system at all. You start off with a single provisional patent, which is recognised around the world, every country, like about 200 of them. That lasts for 1 year. To keep that alive, you've then got to file something called a complete. It lasts for, you can file in individual countries, and the cost might be $5 or $6 or $10,000, depending on what country, for each country or system of countries, like the European system. If you use what's called the PCT system, it gives you another 18 months delay, which allows you to delay for 140 odd countries. Costs, current provisional cost might be in the order of 10,000 to 12,000. Complete, similar figure, and if you go individual countries, then it's, as I said, anything from $4,000 to $10,000 per country. Generally, at the end of 2.5 years, for having perhaps half a dozen countries, which is typical, you probably want about $70,000 or $80,000. It lasts for about 21 years, but you've got to have that sort of funding to support it.
I think we've got time for one more question from a prospective inventor right over here.
Howard, over those 56 years, what's the invention that you're either most proud of or the one that you remember most of all?
I think the very first one that I was involved with, which is the Ken Metcalfe photocopier, it was fundamental, very important at the time, but he didn't realise it. But very close to those are the ones that I'm now dealing with. We're converting brown gold to black with minimal energy conversion costs, and I'm quite excited about some of the technology, some of the people. But yeah, I think that fundamental photocopy. Just a shame that we couldn't make it commercial.
I think we can take one more question.
Howard, thank you for a great insight into what your professional role is about. Absolutely fascinating. What is the impediment to government subsidy or support for innovators in our country?
Thanks for that question. It's very dear to my heart. It seems to be that it's like bees to the honey pot. Once you start feeding them with welfare money, they lose the capacity to hunt. And I think an inventor has to be tough. I think they need to develop contacts. They need to find good advisors. And if they simply get a wad of money from government, they tend to lose that hunger. And as I said, the 5 projects I'm working on at the moment, none of those have got government money behind them. And I've seen that consistently. Very small amounts of money don't seem to hurt, or when the project's well underway, it doesn't seem to hurt. But at that critical stage, that early stage, money without good help, advice, and so on, just doesn't seem to work.
Thank you very much, Howard. I don't think we have any more questions. On behalf of everyone here, a small token of our appreciation, Howard. And would you all please show your